Thank you, Mr. President. Today, our nation is more than $15 trillion in debt. The President's budget will increase government spending by $47 trillion over the next decade. Included is the largest tax increase in American history, while our national debt increases to $25.9 trillion over the next 10 years. That's right. This budget proposes a massive tax increase, not as a plan to address the national debt, but to fuel more reckless big government spending. Our nation cannot afford to continue down this path. This reckless budget will not only saddle our children and grandchildren with massive government debt, but it proposes to raise taxes on the very businesses that we need to create jobs. How can this president and the majority party claim to be pro-jobs when everything they're doing is anti-business? This budget threatens our long-term economic security and places a greater burden on our children and grandchildren who will be forced to live and pay for Washington's inability to solve this problem. And while I believe the president's budget spends too much, borrows too much, and taxes too much, here in the Senate, the majority party has chosen to go to the other extreme. They have now refused to pass a budget for more than 1,000 days. It is our responsibility as legislators to develop a real workable budget that will put our nation back on the path of economic prosperity. Unfortunately, the majority has simply not taken this responsibility seriously. Now, there are some who claim the spending caps established in the Budget Control Act constitutes a budget. And quite frankly, I disagree. At a time when millions of Americans are out of work, this behavior in Washington continues to create great uncertainty and stifles economic growth. No state has felt the failures of Washington more than the state of Nevada. My state continues to lead the nation in unemployment, with more than 160,000 Nevadans looking for a job. With the so-called stimulus plans, cash for clunkers, and bailouts, Washington's response to our economic problems have been woefully inadequate and, in Nevada, a complete failure. Here's the kind of stories that I hear all too often from my fellow Nevadans. You may recall that my wife Pam and I own the Straw Hat Pizza here in Carson. Pam has owned and operated the restaurant since May of 1985. Unfortunately, after 25 years of operation, today is our last day of being in business. We are forced to close our doors and likely file for bankruptcy due to the horrible economic situation in our state and Carson City in particular. It's a true tragedy. The lifelong endeavor ends this way, and Pam feels that she is a failure. I keep reminding her that the failure was not hers, but rather a failure of liberal elected officials to do what's right for our country and get out of the way. Let free enterprise work its magic, and in turn, let individuals flourish. Members of Congress are willfully refusing to put our nation on a path of long-term fiscal responsibility, creating greater uncertainty, contributing to an anemic economy that is forcing small businesses to close their doors. As long as this is the case, Americans will continue to be frustrated and angry with Washington's inability to produce real results. Our nation's capital remains the only place in the country where difficult decisions are not made. Congress continually kicks the can down the road, leaving tough fiscal decisions for future Congresses, future administrations, and worse, the next generation. In light of these facts, is it really any mystery why Congress is currently experiencing its worst approval ratings in history? I introduced the No Budget, No Pay to force Congress to face reality, take responsibility for running this country. This bipartisan legislation requires that the Senate and House of Representatives pass a budget and all appropriation bills by the beginning of each fiscal year. Failure to do so would result in the loss of pay until Congress takes its job seriously. If Congress does not complete its constitutional duties, then its members should not be paid. It's that simple. If you do not do your job, then you should not be paid. This concept resonates with the American people. I know this because I've asked Nevadans during a series of telephone town hall meetings last year whether they supported a bill that would hold members of Congress's pay if they failed to pass a budget. More than 4,000 Nevadans participated in this poll, and 84% of them supported the no budget, no pay concept. The budget is not a trivial piece of legislation or a campaign document. It is a roadmap that identifies goals, priorities, and establishes a multi-year fiscal course for the nation. If done right, it can provide stability and set expectations for where we want to take our nation. Budgeting is not a strange concept. It is something that is done at all levels of government, businesses large and small, and every kitchen table across the country. It is past time for Congress to actually implement policies that would encourage the economic growth we need to ensure that workers can have good jobs and provide for their families. While the No Budget, No Pay Act will not solve every problem here in Washington, I sincerely believe it would be a step in the right direction. These essential functions of Congress are vital to fiscal responsibility and creating greater certainty so our job creators can flourish. I was pleased to see reports of growth, small growth in our economy, but lack of clarity provided by Washington continues to hamper economic growth. Back home, Nevadans continue to struggle. Small businesses are trying to survive, while gridlock in Washington is making it harder for employers to know what to expect in the coming year. Establishing a responsible budget would be a good first step towards placing our nation on the path to a more prosperous future. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.